45 years old is the number we'll put on Mr. Punk. And I guess now we should talk about AEW. You and I had a bit of a discourse last week about the Sting angle. I am a super Sting fan and so excited to see the way they've tried to give him a proper send off with the last match. And it feels like they're going to set all kinds of records for themselves in Greensboro. As we're recording, I think they're just shy of 16,000. Only a handful of tickets remain. They continue to open up some production kills, so I'm sure it'll expand more and more. I've even heard rumors they might be trying to rent a theater next door just to show it on closed circuit. That sounds old school, and it is not the type of conversation we've heard about AEW in a while. But our Henson Close Shave of the Week this week is the promo that Darby Allin cut on the Young Bucks this week. Now, we did a poll over on our YouTube, which you can find at 83weeks.com or 83weeks on youtube.com. They both take you to our YouTube, but we ran a poll there. We had 5,200 votes who said that they thought you would hate this Darby Allin promo. I'm sure you saw the promo. He is not talking about the attack on Sting or the attack on Sting's sons. He was talking about his personal issue with the Young Bucks. And he sort of blurred the lines a little bit and talked about how they passed him up. But there was one EVP here who had brains, and I'm not talking about Kenny Omega. That was indeed a Cody Rhodes reference. And then he talked about how these guys would instead hire their friends like Brandon Cutler. They even called it All Friends Wrestling, which I believe is something that Jim Cornette coined originally over on his podcast. So he's leaning into a quote unquote worked shoot brother, internet wrestling community centric promo. So the listeners of this show over on YouTube felt pretty strongly, 70%, that you would hate this promo. What did you think of Darby's promo?
I think it was typical AEW. It's indie-rific. I think, if you look at that promo in terms of the structure and delivery of the promo, it was great. It was passionate. It was coherent. It had a strong central message and theme. Unfortunately, the strong central message and theme was indie-rific as hell, typical AEW, appealing to the Dave Meltzer audiences of the world. It's just stupid. You could, first of all, those who voted, and 70% of those who thought I would hate it were absolutely, I don't hate it. I don't actually give two shits one way or the other. I've got no dog in the AEW hunt. I do not take them seriously as a legitimate competitor or legitimate growth opportunity in the wrestling business. It is what it is. It's Tony Khan with his own little wrestling fantasy camp, and he's having fun with it, and good for him and good for the people that are making money. But it was nonsensical. The entire story with Sting is not good for Sting. I'm proud of Sting. I'm a huge Steve Borden fan and obviously a Sting fan character, but you could drive trucks through the holes in the way this story has been presented. And if it weren't for the fact that Sting has been around as long as he's such a beloved character. He's achieved so much. He's delivered so much to so many people for such a long period of time that they would have sold out 16 or 17,000 tickets regardless of who Sting's opponent or the story was going to be. It has nothing to do with the Bucks and their popularity or their story or their promos or anything else they're doing. In fact, the fact that they were able to sell the 16 or 17,000 tickets, given the story that we're watching, is a true testimony to Sting and has nothing to do with the brain trust or lack thereof at AEW. I mean, if you just look at that story, the fact that, presumably the Young Bucks turned heel based on the the internet reaction to their involvement in the CM Punk backstage debacle. And because the audience blamed the Young Bucks, they then went, okay, hell with it. We're going to be heels, whatever. I guess that was the inciting moment that changed their characters, and they became heels and inserted themselves, or were inserted. I'm not suggesting they did it, but they then became inserted in the Sting story. And oh, by the way, Sting, we bring in Ric Flair because we're going to bank on this nostalgia, which I think was a great idea. And I loved it. I was looking forward to it. And Sting is going to be a part of this story, which creates opportunity. You know, is Sting going to turn on, or excuse me, is Rick going to turn on Sting? I would have hated it, but at least it's there. It's something to anticipate, to discuss, to talk about, much like we're talking about with Rock. Is he really a heel, or is he there to help Cody? That kind of intrigue and that nuance in the story is what helps create anticipation. So I was excited that they brought Rick into the story, because it can only, that nostalgia and that legacy can only enhance the outcome eventually when you get to it. And a week before, we see Sting show up, and he's in a tag with Darby or whatever he was doing, and he gets his ass handed to him and his kids, beat up with baseball bats and bloody. And there was not even a reference to Ric Flair, why he wasn't there. Not even a reference. It's like it fucking never happened. How, whatever. But that's a hole. And now this, Darby's out there cutting a promo that has nothing to do with what we saw the week before. And oh, we're gonna call back to the internet wrestling community story that's floating around, and we're gonna build a story based on that. It is childish. The booking in AEW is just atrocious. I hated it. It's not, whatever. It is what it is. I don't care. You know, I just can't take any of it seriously. I can't.
I, for one, did think we were going to see at least some comments. Maybe we'll see. I assume we'll hear from Sting this week. We know we will next week, because they're got a double taping in Huntsville. But it's going to be interesting, to say the least. How we
what do you
try
think?
to.
You're always putting me on the spot. I know you're friends with Tony, and you have a different way of communicating than I do. I tend to be, I vomit my emotions when it comes to stuff like this. But I mean, am I being too hard on them?
I think you're being a little hard on the Bucks. I mean, the rumor and innuendo is we heard that Sting picked his opponents, and obviously Sting's going to be a babyface when you're promoting a show around it being Sting's last match. So you need someone to play the heel. So they'll cheer Sting. I get that. So the Bucks were asked to do this, and I think they're doing it to the best of their ability. We actually got a good little comment from, at Yellow Shoes guy, or I'm sorry, at Yellow Shoe guy over on YouTube. He brought the noise here. They should change their name to the Bucks. Not a knock on their age, but for character development. I thought, listen, if you're really trying to position yourself as we're the authority and we're the money and we're only here for the money and we created all these jobs, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it is time to drop the young off and just go with, hey, we're the Bucks and we're heels now, because they're calling themselves Matthew and Nicholas, and they're trying, but it is going to be tough to get them to be taken seriously if they do this brutal beatdown and then it's not discussed the next week. Now, I, for one, thought you might like a little bit of a insider comment, little shoot comment, blurring the lines. But I felt like first, I mean, we have time for that later. At first, I felt like we needed to establish that, hey, Darby's here to defend Sting's honor. But I do like the idea of, hey, respectfully, in just a few weeks, Sting's gone. Darby might continue this feud with the Young Bucks. I get we need some backstory. I just don't know if we needed it there. And maybe they're saving it for something that Sting is going to do next week on with a promo with his sons or something. I don't know. But it just didn't feel connected. Every now and again you have, what are those things y'all do in movies and television? You have like a continuity person. And it feels like in this particular moment, we needed somebody to be like, hey, Darby, don't forget to remember to mention the blood that's all over their suits right now. Like that was just sort of glossed over.
In television, that position is called a story editor. And a story editor, whether it's a movie or television, a story editor is to make sure that if there is an arc, and by the way, I don't think there is one in AEW. I think these are random ideas that develop in Tony's head and end up on television without a lot of conversation, or at least the conversation that should be taking place. But a story editor would look at, okay, here's my 12-week story or 5-week story, whatever it is. Here is the premise. Here is the arc. This is what I want to happen. And the story editor's job would be to make sure that the narrative, whether it be in the form of an in-ring promo like we saw out of Darby, or the action in the ring and the outcomes of conflict and resolution throughout the arc, the story editor is there to make sure that the story stays on track and you're checking the boxes along the way in the arc, the critical points in a storyline that need to happen in order to hope to build anticipation, create more interest, whatever it is, in the story. There is no story. First of all, there's no story to begin with. There is an excuse for having the Bucks in the match. That's exactly what this is. I've said so many times, whether it's on this show or Strictly Business or in interviews that I've done with others, is story requires discipline. Discipline meaning if you look at any basic fundamental story, television, movies, books, doesn't fucking matter. There are points along the way in that story that you really have to make sure you address. Check that box at that point of that story in order to have any hope of a story building, so that at the end of the story, when you finally get your resolution and your outcome, the audience reacts the way you want them to. There is no discipline. There is no story editor. There's no even fundamental comprehension of continuity in story or in character. It's just random, emotional fantasy internet booking. It's inderific as hell. That's all it is. It is not episodic in any way, shape, or form. So I think to expect that there would be any kind of continuity based on everything that we've seen out of AEW up until this point is really wishful thinking and kind of naive. Do I think they're holding back some plot point or some big moment? I hope they are, but nothing they've done up until this moment that we're recording this podcast suggests to me that that's the way they think or that's the way they operate. It just isn't. This is just random stuff thrown up against the wall. Used as what they call a story is nothing more than an excuse for what Tony wants to do next week. It's sad. It's sad because AEW is missing, has missed, and is continuing to miss such a great opportunity. And they may or may not have another opportunity like this down the road. Perhaps they will. Perhaps they'll get renewed. I hope they do. And they'll have time to figure this stuff out. But as of right this minute, there's no story. There's no build. There's just random stuff being thrown up against the wall. And just, like I said, it doesn't work for me. There's people out there that enjoy it, huge AEW fans, and are drinking the AEW Kool-Aid, and they're going to be loyal AEW fans no matter what happens. Happy for them. For me, my perspective, I absolutely can't take them seriously. I don't want to say a joke, but it's just hard for me to take them seriously.